Well, good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us from near and far in the room today to have a very action-packed agenda, and a particular welcome also to those joining us via the live stream. To the audience in the room, please behave. You're being watched around the UK and indeed in other parts of the world. My name is Eddie Copeland. I'm the Director of Government Innovation here at Nesta, so welcome on behalf of the organisation. As I said, we are very excited to be talking through a packed agenda of all the kinds of questions that my colleagues and I spend our time thinking about, and we're delighted that so many of you are interested as well. You'll see our core focus is how do cities, and particularly the public sector organisations that work in them, make smarter use of data to do things like improve decision making, improve the delivery of public services, and tackle all the big challenges that you and I care about. You'll notice that this morning's session is largely focused on what's already happening, giving you some actual examples of what is already being done. In the afternoon, we're focusing more towards the future, looking at some of the big and challenging questions around how we get all of this right. We've called it City Data from Analytics to AI because we've noticed of the rising sophistication in the types of tools that cities and public sector bodies are applying to data. We are excited, we're motivated by all that new stuff, but we also recognise the need to try and make sure that the basics are in place as well, and often we find that that's the bit that is missing. So today, the kinds of things that we are trying to find out from our speakers and from our panellists are really about who is already doing what. Let's raise the level of awareness of what is being done. What are the big challenges and what are the benefits of trying to go through the hard process of making smarter use of data? How do we figure out and navigate the ethics around some of these data methods and the tools associated with them? And are there actually any compelling use cases for cities and the public sector of artificial intelligence? We read lots of articles, but what's the substance behind it? First, just a few words of housekeeping from me. Should you need the toilets during the day, they're just on the other side of that wall, so best to head out the back and just turn to your left. There is not a fire drill expected today, so if you hear an alarm, please treat it like the real thing. Head out through the main entrance and outside the building would turn to our right. Fire marshals would be on hand to show you where to go. The all-important Wi-Fi should be listed on the vast majority of slides. You'll see it here. The network is Nesta Guest, and the password, all lowercase, is C Spark. We sometimes find when everyone en masse tries to log on at the same moment, it doesn't like it. Please keep trying if you struggle first time round over the next few minutes. For those of you who like to be on the old Twitters, the hashtag is simply CityData. We will also be using or giving you the chance to take part in some polls during the day, trying to survey your opinion. People tuning in remotely can do this as well. If you simply go to the URL slido.com, nothing to download, but slido.com, and enter the event code CityData, you will be able to participate in some of our polls. I'll mention the first one in a bit. You'll see there's a question waiting for you already. And also it's a chance to use your tablet or phone devices to ask questions of our panellists. There will be time to do some old school microphones around the room as well though. In a slight change to our agenda, I'm afraid to say our first speaker is a man in demand and is speaking at no fewer than 3 conferences today. So I'm going to save the rest of my introductory remarks for a little later and have great pleasure in introducing Paul Maltby, who's the Chief Digital Officer at the newly named Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Is that right? Got it? Many of you will know Paul has had a fascinating and high-profile career in the civil service, also with stints in local government, so he's a man who definitely knows what he is talking about. I'm delighted that he's going to tackle a nice, easy question to get us all warmed up, which is what should be the UK's vision for local government data? On which note, please put your hands together for Paul Maltby.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thanks, Eddie. I think a real thank you from many of us for the work that you've done and that Nesta have done in pushing this agenda, not just recently, but actually over a period of years before it was perhaps as high profile as it is at the moment. So yeah, so I'm Chief Digital Officer at the MHCLG, which really trips off the tongue, doesn't it? And previously I looked after the data agenda in Government Digital Service, spent some time in Leicestershire County Council. So this issue of data, local government services, and the interaction with citizens is something really close to my heart. And I need the clicker, don't I? So where I want to start is so often on these things, we dive straight into the flashy, shiny data science use cases. And I do get it. I spent quite a bit of time in central government trying to bring that community of data scientists, which was emerging at the time, together and to really try and amplify the knowledge of that and the work that was going on. But as for a vision of local authority data, frankly, any public sector data, I want to anchor us at the other end of the scale. And if we need a simple vision, I think it's time for us to fix our plumbing. So I want to start off with the positives in local government's digital and data work, of which I think there's a fair amount. Now, I tend to think of local digital services in sort of three waves or three sort of stages, and I think we're well past that first stage where every council has a perfectly usable website. You can do lots of forms and payments online. Pretty much all of them are mobile responsive. Local government's come a long way since when? What would you say, 2010? Due to work of obviously in the councils, but also the organisations, the member organisations as well. And I think we're well into our second phase, and I think of the second phase as being dominated by user-led, citizen-led design, component architecture, data thought about as a core asset from the start of the design of those services. We're seeing service design teams and different forms of digital capability really starting to pop up in a number of local authorities of different types. Oops, I did that the wrong way round. There we are. And there are dozens of good examples where you can point to a great citizen journey through digital services, but also based on a more sensible architecture and not the sort of closed proprietary legacy systems that we've been too used to. But having said that, I think we are only just in the start of that second phase. I think there's too often the experience of using digital services in local government, whether as an officer or as a user or citizen, is pretty poor, and we're trying to do what we can to move that along. So what do I think about this third wave of reform, right? So I think of it's a phase of much more radical automation, where we've got widespread and default use of machine learning to improve efficiency for sure, but also to improve to get to a more bespoke experience of public services within local government. So I think there's a huge opportunity and huge exciting benefits that are being worked on right now, but are around the corner from us, perhaps if in the next phase of reform. But I just want us to pace ourselves here, right? So I wanted to keep our feet on the ground, and I want us to think about what are we doing in local government with data and why. So as part of this, I want us to start with some of the basics about getting our data infrastructure into a much better place. Some of you know I looked after the open data work in central government for a little while. I'm really proud that we were top of the W3C's barometer from the time that their benchmarking work started. But you know, truth be told, our data infrastructure in the public sector is in a pretty dire state. This slide usually gets a few groans from the audience. It's usually pretty familiar to people working. So this is, you'll recognise that this is from the Companies House database a few years back. To be fair, actually a great organisation with a great digital record. But this is a result of free text entry, people typing in. It's a field that really probably should just say UK rather than that. And as a result of that, we know that it's hard to use this data, not just to spin up a simple finding, you know, an entry form in on gov.uk or whatever service you're using. But it's also really hard then to start to use that data in a frictionless way to be able to do the analysis that we're all so interested in. As we know in our own teams, in our public services, we hold copies of data duplicated from other services, ones that we've collected from our free text entry. We know that our list of local authorities or our list of countries or our list of services, we know that they're not quite right because they've come in through that way. We know that they're slightly out of date. We know that this makes analysis hard. And it was the thinking behind that that led us to set up the Registers programme when I was back in GDS. We want organisations and indeed particular teams or even individuals to be really focusing on the producing the quality of data that only they can do, and to consume data from other services that is the more canonical or authoritative source of data, such as, say, addresses or local authorities, etc., from elsewhere. The work on registers is constantly expanding. Actually, it's a pretty good list of registers that are up and running, and indeed some of the services built on top of that from GDS are now 200-odd services consuming this data, and something, if you haven't looked at, I would encourage you to look at. Just really core, fantastically boring core infrastructure data done well. The second thing I wanted to touch on was about transactions, and I think it's weird to me that this is often omitted from some of these discussions around local authorities and data. We would sort of do, we sort of pile in on the analysis side. I wonder, is it? I don't know why that is. Is it because that conversation is happening with people thinking about digital services more broadly, perhaps? But I do think it's really important getting the data right within our digital systems in order to do the core services that we are routinely doing day in, day out is so important, and it relies on things like proper data standards. That means we can use a more open architecture. It's really quite fundamental. Perhaps to make an obvious point, there's always a place for bulk use and data, bulk sharing of data, particularly with an analytical framework and under the right conditions. But I think for transactional services where we want to get somebody to I want a thing from the local authority, I want a thing from government, I filled in a form, can you give me my token back? We should be moving to a different pattern that is much more based on attribute exchange. Not because it's just more efficient, but also it starts to build in more privacy protection and more appropriate use cases and traceability of what we are doing and why. APIs are hardly new, right? But really, even within central government, this process of doing personal data exchange is really only starting to begin. HMRC's got some nice examples, actually not that new anymore, with places like the Home Office and also out to their external market. You know, the people who do the tax services out in the third-party private sector. I think the potential in local government for this type of work is huge. I don't see a huge amount of it going on already, and I think it's important that we realise that we've got to update our methods in order to keep pace with this change that's happening. If we're relying on doing transactions based on amalgamations of bulk data from a number of different services, we're probably not doing something right here. And so on to the analysis, the fun bit, right? So the place where we often start. I'm not going to go through loads of different examples. I think that's a huge amount of what is the programme's going to do today. So I picked one that came up from the Data Science Accelerator programme that, again, we kicked off back in GDS from the GLA in this case. I think there's a huge amount of potential in this. I mean, this was just something where the folks started to look at clustering algorithms to understand that. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in clustering algorithms personally, alongside the more sophisticated use cases for when we're doing over policy or service design. And if we're talking about, mentioned data access and sharing, I think when we're thinking about analysis, remember that after what seemed like years and years and years of work, we did change the law on this in the Digital Economy Act last year for specific use cases. The legal framework is much more defined and has the ability to change through secondary legislation. So in the course of the work that we were doing there, we often found that the law was used as a reason not to do things, but actually often when you probed, it was a bit of a myth rather than a reality. Sometimes, of course, it's a real blocker, and when it's a blocker, it's a big one. But I think this framework hopefully gives you more leeway in local government as well as in central government to do sensible things in the right way. And finally, on to the fun bit. So I mentioned the robots earlier. I wanted to get the basics right, but I'm also really excited about the possibilities here. And I'll be catching up on the later stage of the day, Eddie, on the online. Is it different from analysis that I just mentioned? I think probably not. In my head, the difference is about using analysis deep into digital services, incorporated within the digital service, rather than thinking about analysis. Too often in public sector, we think of analysis pointing upwards to policy or to politicians or to senior decision makers. And I think there's something about incorporating the machine learning tools that we have access to within the core services themselves. Always a risk highlighting an organisation that you don't know, or I'm not vouching for it, but I do think it's interesting to think about what's the third-party network, if you like, of services working in this space. So this is an example from the public.io stable, and I include it because I think it's, again, talking about like more root. We talk about the sort of fancy end of the scale, and I think something quite really good and nice about thinking about using this type of sophisticated analysis for something as workaday as doing rotas for, say, social care workers and doing that more efficiently. So this sort of thing. And we've seen just in the last few days the first tranche of the challenges in the GovTech challenges and competitions. So a number of those were driven by local authorities, so Monmouthshire and Blaenau Gwent and Durham councils putting in challenges into this. And I think I'm really interested and looking forward to seeing what offers we're getting out from the private sector as tools and opportunities to come into this space to help deliver public services in that form of automation. So what are we doing within MHCLG to help, and how's my new digital team, what's my new digital team working on? Well, two big things, I think, as well as the internal services within the department. The first is around local government's digital capability and services. We're clear that we're just one part of a network of people that have worked for years in this space. We know that, not just the top-down organisations, the membership organisations, but increasing these bottom-up communities like iNetwork and Local Gov Digital. We're going to be talking much more about this in about a month's time, so some of you may be involved with work behind the scenes from local government to try and shape some of this. But I'm particularly interested in what we should be doing centrally to try and work out the technical service patterns so that we can do repeated uses of similar services. So this was an example back from GDS's work on the government as a platform services, where they work with a number of councils. We know that local government services are different on purpose, we get that, but we also know there's a lot of things in the design and the components that might be used for a number of citizen-facing and indeed other services within local authorities, where we can take some of the pain out of people moving from that old world to a new, more user-led design and component architecture. And we'll be working on that and trying to find this space where we can share that knowledge and those patterns bottom-up, as well as from the things that we'll be doing centrally, but more on that anon. The second place where we're working as a team is on what we've been calling digital land, based on the bit actually towards the back of the 2017 Conservative Manifesto that said we wanted to do, they wanted to do more on making better use of geospatial data from government to drive service improvements in the economy. We're working on the hypothesis that we can do more to improve the diversity in the house building sector and indeed the world of planning by improving access and usability of the data in that sector. But we also know that that data is blooming hard to find and use if you're trying to build digital services on top of it. Plenty of examples, but one that we were just looking at the other day, so I just included it, was around tree preservation orders. Right, every council does that separately, that's fine and important that they do that locally, but as a result it's really hard to find these things even when they're included in data.gov. They're based on different definitions and standards, and the way in which they're published and the licenses that come with them are really hard, which makes it really difficult if you're an entrepreneur out there trying to do digital services based to improve the house building or planning sector. Makes it really, really tough. We like some of the examples. So this is Mapping GM. So up in Greater Manchester, what they've done to try and improve the access and visibility of that data. That's the sort of thing we're looking at to see where we can do. And actually, the end result is trying to drive the entrepreneurs in this sector. So Digital Land's a nice example that help SME house builders prospect for sites to build on. But we want to see more organisations in this sector with ever more sophisticated data science-led tools. But in order to do that, we've got to fix the fundamentals. So if you're interested in this is our little pitch. Please come along to this event if you're in London, or obviously interact with us online, or come and get in touch with the team at New Speak House. We're doing something on the 30th as part of our discovery phase in that. So last couple of minutes from me, some final thoughts. If you didn't get the message already, I'm trying to say I'm really interested in the potential on the data science side, but please let us understand that we've got to fix some of the underlying systems. I want us to be proud plumbers, right? A bit like Bazalgette and the fabulous Victorians who were involved in public works. I think this is a similar type of endeavour, and I think it's something we should take pride in. A second thing is that you know, we're all into this stuff, right? And it's a bit fabulously geeky and we love it, but we've got to realise that within our organisations, whether it's data or digital services, this is still a too rarely deeply understood issue. This is from Janet when she was at .everyone. I still think it rings really true both on digital and on data, basically saying it's not good enough anymore if you're in the organisation, particularly as a senior leader, and you don't know how to turn your machine on properly or what really it does. We wouldn't say that it's okay not to understand finance or the law or programme management. And similarly, it's not okay these days to not understand this stuff. So we've got a bit of a journey to go on that. And then I know this is going to be a part of the day-to-day, but it's something that I can say from personal experience in central government, this stuff comes at you more quickly than you think. When you start to bring sophisticated tools at the data that we have and the problems that we have. Again, we've got a version of a data science ethics framework that was out there that we put out there as a sort of first cut. That's in a new iteration. It's just going through at the moment. It's looking really good from what I've seen of it. So I'd really encourage you, as you embark on this journey, to bring those tools that help us think about what we can do and what we shouldn't do, and what can you legally do and what should you do are not necessarily the same questions. And I'd encourage you to make that part of this exciting agenda. So that's it from me. I hope that gives you a bit of an introduction, hopefully this sense of a story that keeps our feet on the ground as our eyes go upwards. But I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what's going on, and thank you very much, Eddie.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Paul, sadly, as I said, is having to dash off to his next gig, but he's very good on Twitter, so if you want to ping him a question that way, Maltby PS is the way to contact him. And I'll just say I had a moment of extraordinary excitement around the idea of digital land, which is like a Neverland, but with better digital transactions, perhaps. But that's a digital government joke. Moving on swiftly. Just wanted to mention a few ways that you can get involved in today. I mentioned Slido. If you haven't already, strongly encourage you to take part, either sli.do or just slido.com if you find that easier. Do go online. You should hopefully see our first poll question. With some trepidation, we are asking you, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about city data, if at all? Please bear in mind there is no sort of filter going on that, so keep your answers helpful and constructive, please. But start, if you can, go to slido.com, see what you think about that. We'll look at the results before we go into our first panel session. I should also mention that based on some of the practical work and some of the research that we've been doing on public sector use of data, we're almost at the final stage of a draft final stage of a draft. We're almost ready to publish a data practice guide talking about how public sector organisations can use data analytics and other data methods specifically for actionable insights. So we're interested in what you can do with your data. We're really keen to get your feedback, your constructive criticism before we publish it. If you'd like to, please either find the tweet I put out, I think, last week, or just go to that link, bit.ly Nesta data guide. Bit.ly is case sensitive for URL, so all lowercase, bit.ly Nesta data guide. You can comment directly on a Google Slides version there, or drop me an email, but we'd love to hear your feedback so we can get that really helpful. Could I also just ask, could we have a brief show of hands of, are you currently working on some form of data initiative in your organisation? Hands up, please. Wonderful. Keep your hands up if you think anyone outside your organisation knows about this. Okay, that's promising, that's promising. You can put your hands down now. What we have found, though, when we talk to public sector organisations around the country, is that loads of people are working on some really important, good stuff, but often they're doing it independent of other people trying something very, very similar, where they've been through the same pains and maybe even have some really useful templates and ways of working. We've been starting to help get some of the offices of data analytics together to share things like information governance templates, which we know are all important. We're thinking, though, of setting up a data intervention library just to make it super easy to quickly find out who is doing what. We'll send out a link if you would like to submit your own case study to that after this event. Final quick thing is to say today is not just about absorbing what happens up here on the stage, it's about meeting everyone else in the room. We've already seen many of you are working on interesting data initiatives. So outside we will be grouping around in clusters to talk about some different themes. So if you're looking for a prompt to your networking, the first session will be talking about your own data sharing initiatives. Go and gather to discuss those. New technologies, whether it's IoT, blockchain, AI, whatever that might be. Working with the tech sector. I know we've got some SMEs in the room. Please do share your pearls of wisdom about forming the best relationship with you. And our speakers on our next panel, Offices of Data Analytics, have kindly agreed to gather should you wish to grill them slightly more on what they have all been up to and how to replicate it in your own area. On which note, can we then bring up the Slido screen, please, looking at our technicians at the back? Let's just see if any of you have managed to successfully submit your first question, and this is always the first test of any technology-related conference. The results are hidden. Opportunity. Opportunity in our word cloud looks like a big one. Transport, clearly one of the biggest, well-known use cases for data. Messy, absolutely. Paul touched on this messiness. The fact we can't even spell Scotland correctly more than once is indicative. Anything else that stands out there? Inconsistent. Punishment. Okay, well, we hope the person who posted that, there'll be a group hug at the end for you. We feel your pain, we promise. So do look out for all of those, that data practice guide. Do take part in Slido, including for our next session. You should find a tab to ask a question. Please do use that, and we will endeavour in each of our panel sessions to ask the top 3 most upvoted questions. For now, though, let's get on to our main piece of substance for our panel. Our first topic is on Offices of Data Analytics, sometimes called ODAs. If any of you have read any of my blogs, you'll know that this is an area of particular interest for me. I'm fascinated by the potential for data analytics to be a reason for public sector organisations to collaborate with their data, to source data from multiple public sector partners and other sources in order to tackle the big challenges that they face. The big question, though, is, well, actually, what are they? This sounds a bit of a nebulous term, and do we actually need them at all? Well, who better to help me answer that question than the people who are currently running them or the people who are working to set them up? Today we have representatives from Manchester, from Essex, Worcestershire, and from London. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to invite to the stage, come up now, please, Steve Skelton, Dr. Vicky Harrington, Neil Crump, and Paul Hodgson. Please put your hands together for them. now under interrogation lights. Just checking my lapels now on. I've asked each of our speakers just to kick us off by giving us a bit of context, particularly for those of you who might be less familiar with their activities, and ask them to mention things like what actually is an Office of Data Analytics as interpreted in their area, why has it been created, and give us some examples of stuff you're actually working on. Maximum 5 minutes each, but Steve, would you like to kick us off?
Okay. Can you hear me okay? So the first thing I should say for sort of northern geography zealots amongst us is, whilst it says Stockport, I am here for Greater Manchester, so Eddie's right when he says that. And I think the foundations for the Greater Manchester Office of Data Analytics lie in quite a long tradition, healthy respect for data and the value of data, which has underpinned a lot of the devolution business cases and conversations we've had with government. So often in the form of policy evaluation or modelling, and more latterly, I think, in areas around interest in areas like predictive analytics, etc., like a lot of people will talk about, I'm sure. So what is the Greater Manchester Office of Data Analytics? In that context, I guess the point of differentiation is that it's very much a collaborative approach, which is seeking to bring together the assets and the skills in the city in its sort of most civic sense, so rather than just in the institutions at the city level. So in the councils and in the NHS and in the combined authority, yes, but also in the community organisations like Open Data Manchester, in the universities and sort of private interests as well. So I guess it's an approach, a work programme, rather than currently a kind of you can't open the door on the Office of Data Analytics, I often say, and step in, and if you were, you'd find lots of people sort of contributing, as part of their day job. Why set it up? I think it's a catalyst. I think a big part of its responsibility is coordination, but it's in particular, I think, about showing the art of the possible that comes from the application of modern digital and data capabilities to existing public service problems. So there's quite a unique governance situation in Greater Manchester through the devolution of both the NHS side, but also the wide range of powers that the Mayor has, and I think it's the ODA programme that's there to really show how within that environment you can use cutting-edge data techniques to answer key problems. And what problems? So we're in very much sort of early stage development. We are in the sort of scatterplot of Greater Manchester governance. We're nestled under something called GM Connect, which I've been involved in for a couple of years. So that covers off a lot of work around technical information sharing, information governance, etc. And this is a sort of the analytics piece of that. And we're very closely aligned to the public service reform programmes in Greater Manchester, which are in turn linked into the Greater Manchester strategy. So we've picked from that a theme which unites both health partners and kind of city government partners, other public services, and feeds into the economic challenges of the city around productivity, which will in turn inform our work on the local industrial strategy. And that theme is going to be school readiness. So we are going to try and keep it small and use that initial piece of work to essentially force us to make some choices around technologies, around collaborative methodologies, and so we'll be looking to do some quite open work across the city over the summer, over the next 6 months, and under the guidance of an expert academic panel who are guiding the school readiness work. The last thing I'd say is I think it's not about finding silver bullet answers. It's very much, I think, about providing a number of micro insights which have very tight feedback loops between practitioners, analysts, and kind of strategists, so that we can make sure that insight is sort of amplified, checked, and improved and tested within the system quite quickly. So they might be things around the importance of speech and language development. They might be things around professional practice in the home. It could take us in a number of directions, but all grounded in an understanding of data and all sort of feeding off a kind of a common platform. There you go.
Very good. Thank you very much. Vicky.
Thank you. So within Essex, we're actually calling our initiative the Essex Centre for Data Analytics, or ECDA as it's affectionately known. And what we're doing is we're taking a system-based approach to actually reducing risk and vulnerability. So within the county, multiple agencies are looking at the same problems, different parts of the problem, but nevertheless we're all facing the same problems. So taking a system-based approach for us is the right way. And to do that, we will collaborate with multiple agencies, whether they're private, public sector, or indeed third sector agencies. We want to collaborate with them and share our data. So, you know, to take a big data approach, we need to use the wealth of data that's out there, and we will be doing that via a data sharing platform, which we're already using, that Essex County Council have already established. What we also want is a single analytical hub. So that single hub, now whether that's virtual or whether it's actually sort of, you know, there in reality in the same geographical space is unimportant. But we do want a single hub for the county where we have combined expertise, the data are available, they can be analysed, and as Eddie mentioned, it has to be actionable insight. It has to be something that people can then respond to reduce the vulnerability within the county. The third element, so the hub, the data sharing platform, but the third element that's really important for us within ECTA is the evaluative element. So we have to evaluate what we do. It's not enough to sort of put in place initiatives, early interventions, and not know whether they work or not. So we're also partnering with academia, a range of academic organisations, to ensure that they have access to the data across the hub and across the platform, so that they can then see if what we're doing is working, because if it isn't, we want to stop doing it and we want to try something else. So evaluation is a sort of third concept within ECTA that's really important. Why did we create it? Well, it's an Essex Police-led initiative, but we are working, as I say, with multiple agencies, the local authorities throughout the county. Primarily, we want to provide the best possible service to Essex communities. That's what it's about for us. And if we all operate in silos, each agency, we really can't do that. So this is about providing the best possible service to the public in order to protect life and reduce harm. It's that straightforward. We know in the county that collaboration works. We already have very strong collaborative arrangements with other agencies, the councils, the local authorities. We know that works far better for the public when we work in unison and work collaboratively. So we know that that approach works. Why wouldn't we adopt it in terms of how we analyse data? Thirdly, we want to take far more of a preventative approach. So, you know, policing is about preventing crime, not just reacting to it. And so we want to be far more proactive. And this office, or the Centre for Data Analytics, allows us to actually predict where risk is, so we can intervene at a much earlier point and reduce the vulnerability and risk, rather than waiting to react to a problem that comes about. So that preventative element is crucial in terms of why we set this up. The capability and the skills is another reason for setting it up. You know, it's very difficult to get really good analytical skills, and certainly data science skills. All agencies have analysts. Lots of us have lots of data out there. We tend to do a lot of number crunching, but what we wanted was a centre of excellence where we use the latest data science techniques and have the best possible skills that we can share amongst the agencies. And I suppose finally, why did we create it? Because we know there are benefits from doing so. It's a much more efficient and effective approach for us. We know that from what we've already done, and so we want to use that to benefit the public of Essex. So the current initiative, we're in our proof of concept stage in terms of ECTA, and what we're looking at to prove the concept is one particular area. So we've worked very closely with Nesta. Nesta have really helped us in terms of running multiple workshops with agencies, both within the county but also at a national level. And we're looking to tackle modern slavery in particular in terms of the area of vulnerability where we want to reduce the risk. So we're trying to identify or predict those businesses that will be using or exploiting labour. Now, you know, it's a continuum, isn't it? So you can exploit labour at one level, and that will go right through to potentially modern slavery. So we don't know what part of the continuum we might be looking at, but we do know that we want to have an early warning system to be able to identify those businesses that are exploiting labour of one sort or another. We're currently in the discovery phase, and that means we're looking at the various sort of journeys victims might take, but also in establishing a business to identify the touch points and where we might have valuable data sources that we can actually use and that we can then put on the platform and analyse. In terms of the long-term sustainability of the Essex Centre of Data Analytics, once we've proved the concept, then it's something that will be sustainable within the county. We're already having plans put in place in terms of joint appointments between a range of agencies. So if we have a data scientist, it's a joint appointment. We've also got a governance structure set up. So this is very much about having a sustainable model to predict risk, intervene early, and actually prevent things happening in partnership with agencies across the county.
Thank you very much. And we're not judging at all that you've gone for the Essex Centre rather than the office, just ruining our acronym. But no,
we like to be different.
You like to be different, but no, some really important initiatives. Thank you, Neil.
Hi there. I'll start with the why, and that's basically a failed devolution bid. So Worcestershire leaders meet regularly. They wanted to improve the way that they deliver public services in Worcestershire, so devolution was a starting point for them. When that didn't work out, they got around the table and said, well, what have we learned as part of that devolution bid? And that was the fact that integrated services are absolutely vital. And how can you do that? You can do that by joining your different data sets together. So that was kind of the why. Therefore, we went out and started an Office of Data Analytics. Now, that takes courage, right? Because in these times, under increasing pressure to start something new where there's a cost base, takes courage. So what they actually did was put those ideas together and said, right, we will start. However, we'll start in a really, really lean way. So effectively, that meant that they appointed a Chief Data Officer, rather grand title, right? However, the idea behind that is to actually lead the existing agencies in a different approach to data. Yeah, so we haven't started off by putting lots of people together. So like Manchester, there is no office where you can walk into. So I started that off. However, during that time, we created this business case for change. So we went and sat with all of these frontline workers, and they gave us all the fuel that we needed in order to get some more seed funding. So based on those findings, and that's available, it's an open document which we'll make available, you can then see the benefits of actually having an Office of Data Analytics. So I've got one new member into the team, and guess what? It's not a data analyst, it's a change and communication specialist. The reason for that is because what we're looking to do is change the culture of our organisation. And what we need to do is make sure that we take everyone with us. So that was absolutely vital step. You know, forget about the data for a moment. You know, we all want to get in and rush in and start doing stuff. However, let's actually understand what our culture is. However, that said, we have kicked off some projects because we want to make it real to the point that was made before. And therefore, we're using the in-house agency teams to actually deliver projects. So an example would be more on the operational side, so it'd be around patient flow, for example, how we can take people from the acute hospital into different settings like social care settings or home care. We've also then said, okay, well, that's an operational data perspective. What about if we put it into more of an analytics? So we're putting different data sets together, like the acute data set, putting it with the social care data set, looking at over many years, looking at the interventions that are made, and then working out, actually, could we make different interventions that would be more beneficial for those actual service users and also more cost effective for the actual organisations themselves. So in a nutshell, that's kind of where we're at, and I'll be glad to answer any questions later on.
Thank you very much, and particularly thank you for highlighting this point around the organisational cultural change that's behind this, a real key point that I'm sure we'll come back to in just a moment. Paul from Loader.
Okay, so this is the benefit of coming fourth in a line of four, so I'll try not to repeat what the other three have said. I very much agree with what they've been saying. So Loader is a hub, And the idea behind Loader is to operationalise some of the things we learnt during our pilot. So we did a pilot with 12 of the London boroughs, and what we've recognised is that collaborative projects need some extra resources behind them. So we all do data science projects, we all do analytics projects, we all do projects individually, but when you want to do joint projects, whether it's across different local authorities working with their neighbours, whether it's different agencies working, they need extra support. So we've set up 4 different types of support. So one is the project development side, so getting from the initial idea, the initial opportunity, initial challenge, to something that you can actually action, where you've engaged with the people who'll be using it, you've brought the data together, you've solved all the problems, and then you're ready to do the analysis. Just getting to that point requires a lot of effort, a lot of push. The second thing is the information and governance, so putting in place data sharing agreements between all the relevant organisations. The third thing is the technical systems, so the ability to actually share data to do the analytics safely and securely, just sharing what you need to share for the right period of time. And the final bit is the data science capacity. So we've cleared out some of the work programs from our existing staff. So we've got the equivalent to 2 full-time data scientists to work on it. But also we've got collaborations with organisations. So where we're looking to do something that's a bit more experimental, a bit more advanced, we're calling on the Alan Turing Institute. We're working with ONS data science team on specific kind of projects. So it's a combination of in-house staff, but also kind of partnerships where people have got skills, but you can only really access them when you've sorted out all the other things leading up to it. So that's what Loader is. The reason for doing it is a lot of the projects or a lot of the problems we wanted to solve cross boundaries. So there's a certain amount you can do as an individual borough. There's a certain amount you can do as an individual agency or as the strategic planning authority like ourselves. But actually a lot of the problems require 2 or 3 organisations to work together. So that's why we did it. In terms of what we're doing, we're just embarking on a summer of workshops to gather a long list of projects. Yeah, it might be 100, might be a couple hundred, to filter those down and then to get going on a project, a series, like a pipeline of projects. So the pilot was very much of a one-off effort, so there's a big lead into it. The analytics, big kind of evaluation, was what we want to do is have a constant flow of good, sort of useful data science projects, and that's what we're working towards.
Very good, thank you all. And so maybe if I can just start by picking up on Paul's last comment there around trying to create the pipeline of things you're going to work on. I'm very aware everyone right now in the public sector has got huge pressure to tackle, the big line items given the financial pressure that you're all under. The most expensive issues may not be the most appropriate to tackle with data. They may not be the ones that are the same as the political priorities. How are you thinking about prioritising what projects to start to prove that the concept of an ODA is of value and should be sustained and funded for the future? Steve, where do you stand on that?
So I think the interesting thing in GM at the moment is obviously the creation of the mayoral combined authority, and so it's been quite evident how that's provided a focal point around a set of kind of key challenges, of which school readiness is one. So we quite consciously picked something which has got a degree of kind of leadership buy-in already, and to some extent, we could have picked different issues and use those to create the kind of the approach, the methodology, technical platform, etc. But it was a good fit for us because, like I said, it's a good part of the Venn between there are 2 kind of pillars to the devolution programme of Greater Manchester. You've got the combined authority and the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. Early years school readiness, really good Venn in terms of NHS interests and kind of local government interests. But also, directly aligned to a mayoral priority and with a lot of sort of effort going into it and an area where Greater Manchester really needs to make progress. So, the prioritisation was reasonably straightforward, plus it has a feed into productivity and the kind of the economic strategy for the city. I think going forward, I'm really interested in the work that London are doing and trying to open up that prioritisation challenge so that we can source different priorities, be they from local political leaders or the public, as well as sort of the city leadership. And particularly because I think one of the things we need to crack with that more open platform is how we can get value out of people's contributions. If they're interested in doing something, how can we unlock the ability for them to make a contribution, be that as a kind of a citizen analyst or a citizen kind of reporter, or as somebody who's got a set of skills that we can bring to bear, and to do that in a way which is consistent, gives them a return on that, and isn't just kind of a bit of a kind of a flash in the pan like some digital hacks could often be, etc. So trying to do that on a collaborative but evolving platform.
Paul, so just by sort of contrast, you've talked about an open method for trying to crowdsource in suggestions for data analytics projects. What's the vetting of that bit going to look like? How will that crowdsource list, which you can perhaps spell out the sources you think you might get those suggestions from, but how will they be ranked in terms of which ones to start with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure if we've completely cracked it, but the approach we're taking is what we've learnt from doing the pilot, but also learnt from some of the Office of Data Analytics pilots that you've conducted around the country. So we've put together a board which consists of ourselves, the GLA, but also from academia, from London councils, and from a few practitioners in the boroughs themselves, and then I guess other parts of the public service like Transport for London and so on. So the idea is to be as inclusive as possible in terms of gathering the projects. So we'll run a series of workshops, but we'll also try and have a running list on the London Data Store of kind of, these are all the ideas, these are the ones we're working on, these are the ones that are ready to go, these are the ones that have been evaluated, here's the case studies. So you can kind of see through. Hopefully that will spark people to say, well, actually I'm working on something similar, maybe we can tap into your resources, maybe we can offer resources. So I mean, we're looking for a selection of projects, to be honest. So we want some very practical, everyday things. So we're carrying on pursuing the houses of multiple occupation work. So this is very much kind of creating improved lists for inspectors going out proactively looking for these looking for rogue landlords, looking for homes of multiple occupation. But also we want to do some work that's a bit more strategic. So like Steve was saying, about kind of about understanding what the demand for services might be like in, say, the next year, next 5 years. So helping service directors with their kind of predictive work and understanding how they need to kind of reshape things. And also we want to do some more kind of experimental kind of future city type work. So the work we're doing on air quality with our insuring institutes isn't going to be practical for another year or two, possibly 2 or 3 years in terms of the actual improvements on the ground. But it's an important topic that we need to be pursuing in parallel to those kind of everyday frontline kind of projects as well. So we're looking to have a mixture.
I think all of this is, these initial projects are so important in terms of winning over further hearts and minds, showing what can be done, proving this isn't just a sort of theoretical exercise. And I wonder if I can sort of transition then from this prioritisation point onto to address to Vicky and to Neil. How much of this is sort of about changing organisations and changing cultures? Because there's data scientists who can do some very clever things if they're given the right resources and the right data sets. The messiness of the public sector was never designed to do this kind of stuff. How are you thinking about this, the organisational and those cultural questions? And Vicky, would you like to share some thoughts?
So you're absolutely right. Policing certainly wasn't set up to sort of have expertise around data science. I mean, we have analysts without a shadow of a doubt, but we do a lot of what I describe as number crunching. We might call it analysis, but actually we're just sort of presenting numbers. I think what we realise is that we need to have that predictive element. And so in setting up the Essex Centre for Data Analytics, we can really sort of pursue this idea that we use big data, so we don't sort of just individually look at our own data sets. We use big data across multiple agencies and then use it to get everything we can possibly get from it, because organisations, data rich but information poor, so it's about changing the culture in terms of what data can give us, how it can inform decision making, and how it can also ensure that we put very limited resources, and that's true of the public sector in general, not just policing, but how we can put our very limited and precious resources in the best possible place to have the greatest impact. So the Essex Centre for Data Analytics, because we have this multi-agency support within the county, and because we will set up this sort of centre of excellence, is allowing us to pursue that approach as a combined force, not one agency in isolation, but agencies across the county. So I think we are changing the culture slowly. I think even in policing, the culture has changed in terms of the role that analysts play. But I think, we've got a way to go in terms of realising that if we get the analysis right, then actually what we do operationally can be far more effective.
Thank you. Neil, what's your take?
We have got two key drivers, really, and one is early intervention, and secondly, it's around economic growth. So it's how do you change the culture on that? Well, one thing we're looking at is information governance. So we're making it very easy from a centre perspective or an office perspective to allow people to come to us to seek expertise and advice about how to do things differently and how to design information governance from the very start of the process. So that's one thing. Second thing, it's about delivering projects, like to your point. So creating those case studies that we can then share across all of the agencies about what we've done, how we've done it, why it's a success, and so forth. So there's nothing like that real life way of proving culture change, because you do it by doing. And one thing that I'd highlight would be out the patient flow projects that we've been doing. You get people together, you provide a technical link, you do the information governance, and it solves one problem. And actually, from the centre or from the office, what you've done is actually put people together. So people now that never used to speak to each other are now speaking together for the first time. So what they've actually done since the patient flow example, they've then started talking about, oh, if we've done that for patient flow, why can't we do it for children's safeguarding? Yeah. So then the office itself doesn't have to deliver that as a project, right? Because you've put people together, you've given them ways of working, and off they go. So then you start building this organic growth. Yeah. So that's why you don't need this huge team in place to deliver this. You can do it in a very lean way. And I think over time what will happen is that people will actually start giving you resources because they recognise what you're doing is working and what you're doing is changing the culture and it's integrating services. So that will mean that people will start saying, well, Neil, why don't you take these people, put them together and start delivering different things and changing the way that we work.
Thank you. Now, in just a moment, we'll bring up the Slido screen. So if you haven't already, jot down your question on that. Do some upvoting. We'll try and get through the top three. But Neil mentioned the vital two words, information governance. And maybe, Steve, I know Greater Manchester has really gone to town, spent a lot of time trying to get this right. Given that we have good old GDPR Day tomorrow, very, very topical. We've tried not to make every session about GDPR today, but one question for everyone in the audience thinking, all of this sounds like an information governance nightmare. What advice do you give? Is it as hard as it sounds?
Retrofitting good information governance, I think, to the public sector is as hard as retrofitting good technology to the public sector. And much as Paul said earlier, make fixing the plumbing a priority, make fixing the information governance a priority. So. Briefly, GM Connect is the sort of information governance enabling programme for Greater Manchester. We set that up a couple of years ago with some Transformation Challenge Award money we got from CLG as a city region. I think that was a smart move. I guess the one bit is probably the Information Sharing Gateway, which is a system which was developed by Morecambe Bay NHS Trusts, which essentially allows you to make transparent and have visible to the whole system the information sharing agreements right down to data flow level that are in the system. Rolling it out, getting people to use it needs resourcing. It's a big piece of work, but until that is transparent and can be understood and replicated and copied, we're not going to get the kind of pace of digitisation of the information sharing knowledge that I think we need. So that would probably be the one piece of advice.
Okay. And so I think, with all of these practices, the more we can help templatise what works, share the lessons of what's difficult and what can be done more easily, the better. So particularly keen to learn from all of you as you tackle these questions. So let us turn then to our Slido. Let's have a look at what the top voted questions are. Oh, it's just changed. I just started reading one that's now in second place, but let's begin with that. When it comes to data, popped up again, thank you. London boroughs range from amazing to inadequate. We're mentioning no names. Do we need an Ofsted-style rating for best data practices? Paul, let's obviously put that to you, but I guess equally applies right across the public sector. There's a patchwork of maturity in terms of how people address data. Any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for that one. I'd say absolutely not. No, the loader and the GLA is absolutely not about an Ofsted approach. It's about working with coalition of the willing. So organisations that want to join together to work on a particular project, it's about enabling them. And it's about sharing good practice that's been developed in one borough, making it available to another. So I can talk about 2 or 3 boroughs that come to us wanting to improve how they connect up their resident information. And I know 2 or 3 other boroughs that have done a lot of work on that. So we've connected them up and they've learned from each other. And I think it's more about that. And certainly we found through the pilot that we started off with 15. 12 wanted to take part in the pilot. In the end, only 3 were available, had the data that was in good enough format and available at the right time to do the initial analytics with. But actually the others are slowly working their way through, and they'll join the programme when they're ready to. And I think that's got to be our approach. So I'd say absolutely not. But good
Anyone wish to disagree? Or Neil?
Well, just put a little twist on that. So when we talk Ofsted, I also think HMIC, I think the Care Quality Commission, etc. So all of these different national bodies, they have their own perspective about how they're actually going to monitor and improve local services. So my challenge out to them would be, why don't you think about data and how to better improve data, and actually how your organisation should link, so that actually when you come and judge, you actually do that from a whole system syncing perspective.
Yeah, and I think, inspectorates do, don't they? They do look at how we use data. There are some sort of joint inspections that involve different inspectorates across different sectors, but I think you're right. That sort of looking at it end to end as opposed to a particular inspectorate's area is really beneficial, because that's, if we're taking a system-based approach, then actually inspection can benefit from that too. Yeah.
And just on this theme, immediately after our first morning break, we've got Tim from the LGA who'll be talking through how local authorities can assess for themselves their own data maturity and what they could do to improve. So if that theme is of interest, plenty more coming up. Meanwhile, Graham is asking, sort of building on that organisational, perhaps that cultural question, the point that some local government leaders don't seem to understand the potential of analytics to improve outcomes. How do we have the right conversation with leadership? And just my own caveat on that would be getting them to back it, but not just lip service, giving the room, the space, potentially the funding to make this happen. Who feels they've had a good job there? Neil?
Well, why should they invest in data, right? There are so many different things that the leaders could invest in, right? I could invest in more frontline people, or I could invest in more buildings, or I could invest. So I think it's up to us, actually, to be able to articulate in business terms exactly why the data is important.
And that's why I think evaluating what we do is crucial. So if we want to prove the concept, then we have to be able to show the benefits, and we need to evaluate what we put in place. We can't sort of front this as being doomed to succeed. We have to be honest in terms of what's working and what isn't. But if we take that independent approach to evaluation, then I think we can, win people round. But the evaluative element is crucial.
I started off thinking some local government leaders don't understand. That's very kind. And then I was like, well, actually, no, of course they do. Like, there aren't any local government leaders, right, who don't think that better data would help them run their organisation. I think the challenge is for that to be provided, accessible, in a way that genuinely does help them take decisions. I see a lot of data moving around organisations that doesn't add value, and I see a lot of people handling data that don't understand how decisions are taken, the pace, the complexity, the pressures, the multiplicity of governance, etc. So I guess I'd probably fall somewhere in the middle, these guys are right that impact on outcomes use case is the way to show them the art of the possible. But I'd be surprised if many of them are sat there thinking this is all a bit of a fad. I think that what they're waiting for is the tangible thing that they can make happen. And part of the problem, unfortunately, going back to Paul's presentation, is we haven't built the sewers of the digital age, and so the capability of their organisations to respond to those expectations are limited, and hence we got this really quite unfortunate circumstance where lots of people pilot in with a kind of a veneer solution, which everybody who understands data in their organisation knows is complete pants, but it looks better than what they're able to prepare for their own leaders. So I don't know, a little bit catch-22 until we get the proper investment in data architecture and infrastructure.
So you're poised to come in.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing is we need to choose the right question or problem, don't we? So we need to find something that actually means if we have the answer to it, we will be able to do something differently. If we just sort of find out more things, more stuff in order to sort of increase our knowledge, that's great. But actually, in terms of changing outcomes, we have to choose the right question to answer so that we can act differently with that actionable insight to show that we can make a difference through this approach.
Just very, very briefly, I absolutely agree with that, and I think that's probably as much, if not more, an issue of policy exposition, open policy making, design-led policy making, as it is an issue of data. It's about influencing professional decision making.
Yeah.
Very conscious that we're almost out of time, so maybe if we could just go through the panel, starting with Paul, working our way backwards, and feel free to pick off one of these final two questions which have been upvoted. So one, this really important one, how do we measure added value or the ROI on data and analytics? And I can say firsthand, whenever we've tried to stick a number on savings or bottom line difference, for the last 5 years I've tried and I've failed to figure out how to do that well. So interested, particularly in terms of convincing leadership, how important is that? And this other really important question, again, Nesta's seen firsthand, we saw it with the Loader pilot, was there are some public sector organisations who have outsourced IT functions. Some of those providers make it very difficult to get the data back, or what I feel is bad practice, charge the public sector organisation to access their own data. For what it's worth, I'd name and shame them. Let's start with Paul though. Either of those two questions, how would you respond?
I mean, the outsourcing, I think my experience has just been as contracts come back up, or there's opportunities, break clauses, or whether there's opportunities to renegotiate, with the knowledge that we now have. So that's the only way that I know to deal with that. In terms of return on investment, I mean, we as a GLA, we've backed Loader for the first year, possibly 2 years, to give it time to build up that case study. So we'll measure the costs, but we'll measure the benefits. We've got an economics team who specialise in that type of economics. So we absolutely intend to build up those case studies, and then that will make the case for the shape of an ongoing Loader and its funding and so on.
Thank you.
I'd like to take the added value, ROI. The reason for it is we created our business case for change. That got the people on board in terms of, let's do this. The second part is to get into a much more detailed business case. So that what you've been trying to solve for 5 years, I need to actually solve in the next 5 months. And the reason for that is because we want to invest in two things. We want to invest in new technology, and we also want to invest in a new team. So where's the start line is one question, because there's lots of activity going on out there. So you work with early intervention teams, and you say, we could use data. So how important is data to actually solving their problems and adding value is one thing. I think the other side of it, though, is I absolutely need to be looking at cash value. So there will be some use cases there that do have a cashable benefit, whether it be something like fraud, for example, or whether or not it be about school transport and making sure that that is easily in line with where schools are, for example. So you'll need a better transport organisation in order to do that. So there will absolutely be some cashable benefits in there. And come back to us in 5 months' time, and I'll be able to give you a few more answers.
We certainly will. We certainly will. Vicky.
So return on investment again. I mean, any business case that's worth its salt, will identify the benefits. You've got to be really clear on what the benefits are of taking a particular course of action. You've got to set those out to begin with. You've got to obviously track what you're doing, measure your costs before, your costs after. It's all sort of standard evaluative practice. So return on investment, yes, you absolutely can show it. It's not just about monetary value, though. So, there are much wider benefits. If we're talking about reducing vulnerability, if we're talking about changing people's lives, improving the quality of people's lives, we need to be much more sophisticated in how we actually measure those benefits, not just monetary value. But we do need to understand our costs, and it's really important to sort of track that, understand where you're starting from, what you're sort of adding in terms of cost as you go along, and being able to track it.
Thank you very much. Final 30 seconds to Steve.
Maybe a little bit controversial then, and I do appreciate the reality in which people work, but I do think if we're making incremental sort of business case-led decisions for small investments in this stuff, then that reflects the leadership challenge we talked about before. Obviously, the things we choose to do with our programme budgets do need to have an economic rationale to them, but if you're in a leadership position not thinking about chucking a shared load of cash at digital and data, then I think somebody needs to help you get to that position.
They do. Now, diplomatically put, all of our speakers here during the first break will be around on our Office of Data Analytics area outside. Ask Our Events team will point you in the right direction. You can ask your follow-up questions if we haven't approached it already. For now, though, please put your hands together for Steve, for Vicky, for Neil, and for Paul. Thanks very much. Here you go, Neil. Now, a few weeks ago, it was my great pleasure to head up to Edinburgh to take part in Data Fest, which was a series of numerous events held by the Data Lab. And I have to say, I was both astonished by the sheer number of activities and organisations working on data projects all around Scotland, and also very conscious that I was woefully unaware previously as to what was going on. I'm certainly determined to get much more familiar with those activities and make sure that we as Nesta talk about them much more. But for this audience, we thought we would start that process by inviting up to the stage our next two speakers, Catherine Patterson and Stephen Smith from the Scottish Government, to talk about their own work on data. Please give them a round of applause.
Is there a slide button? Okay. Thank you very much. Hi, good morning. As I said, I'm Stephen Smith. I'm a statistician working in the strategy unit in the Scottish Government. And we have an interest in encouraging the better use of data analytics, both to inform policy making, but also to improve the delivery of services. As the panel mentioned, they are very much with an interest in finding projects with enthusiastic, willing participants that we can actually prove the concept and then start to hopefully spread some of the skills across the organisation. Sorry, is this not working? Oh, there we go. So what I thought I'd do is go over some of the projects that we've been involved in, some of the things that are going on in the Scottish Government and the wider public sector in Scotland. Be a very quick overview and certainly not exhaustive, but I'm happy to catch up with anybody later on and talk in a bit more detail about any of the things that you might be interested in. And then I'll hand over to Catherine after that, just to give a more in-depth look at one of the projects we're doing, which is trying to improve the support for people with ill health and disabilities to remain in employment. And we're hoping to use predictive analytics there to better target the support that we're offering. So I'm going to start mentioning Scotland's Data Science Accelerator, which has just kicked off recently. And this is a collaboration with a number of public sector organisations in Scotland, as well as the Data Lab and data scientists working in Scotland. The idea being people submit an idea for a short-term project, again, very much proving the concepts, building skills, building resources, and then they're paired with a mentor with a data science background who will then support them over about 3 or 4 months to develop their projects and start to get some results out of it. So the first iteration of this, there's 4 projects that have been selected, and I'll just go very, very quickly through them. So the first one, matching messy text to standard occupation classifications. So this is National Records of Scotland, who have responsibility for Scotland's census. And going back to seeing messy in the word cloud there, it's very much messy data. There's a number of free text boxes on the census that people can fill in, and as you can imagine, the kind of jobs that people do have a huge amount of variety. So as far as I'm aware, in the last census, they had to employ 200 people, and it took them 100 days to go through the free text boxes and code them. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it's extremely expensive and takes a lot of time and delays all the results that we get out of that. So what this project's looking to do is to use some text recognition and machine learning approaches to try and speed that process up and to automate it as much as possible. And this, it's starting off with this one variable, which I believe accounted for a third of the time it took, so a third of it, 200 people working 100 days. The second one, detecting buildings and historic maps. This is going to be using computer vision and machine learning, so looking at old photos of buildings across Scotland and trying to build maps so we can get ages of buildings. So that's going to be used in improving some of the sales data in Scotland, but also in terms of things like fuel poverty and our house condition survey, just trying to improve the understanding of the history of buildings in Scotland. The third one, burden of disease in Scotland. This is actually a data visualization project. So the problem here is that we've actually already got the data, we've got the analysis, but it's just there's so much that the people who are actually making decisions, just there's no chance that we're going to get through all this information. So this is going to be looking at some user engagement, some visualization, just trying to work out how we can get this data into the hands of people who are actually making the decisions, particularly at local geographies, looking at the burden of disease, looking at the risk factors associated with poor health outcomes, and trying to work out how we actually have more impact with that data. And so the third one's a Scottish Government one, so I'll go into a bit more detail about this, also because I like the fact that it uses satellite data. I thought it was quite exciting. So this is looking at a crop map of Scotland, the idea being that we've got very costly surveys at the moment where people, farmers, landowners have to submit data, quite often in paper forms, to say what they're using their land for. And there's economic incentives here as well. People get, cap payments, etc., which will also have to be replaced in the next couple of years of Brexit. So, purpose of this is using the Copernicus program, the EU's program, which has 2 satellites. What we're hoping to do is get data from that. It's probably more information we have time for here, but I can go into it in more detail later. So it's going to be training the data on land that we already know the use of, and then quality assuring it with data from the other satellites, and building machine learning algorithms that will actually tell us what the land in Scotland has been used for, which Scotland's got a huge amount of rural land of lots of different makeups, so it can be really quite difficult actually to get a handle on what Scotland looks like. So this is the kind of outputs that we're expecting to get. This is a similar project that was taking place in England, and just with the variety of lands on the side there. So this is what they're hoping to produce, and as I say, hoping to replace quite a lot of the paper surveys, but also as we move to a new common agricultural policy or replacement of that, just to understand the changes of that, there's a lot of incentives there that, people might change the use of the lands and things, so that will become increasingly important over the next few years. And I think they're also just wanting to test the concept as well. It's the first time that our rural analytical services have actually taken this approach, and they're quite excited about it at the moment. So before we go into Single Health and Work Gateway, I'll mention a couple other things very briefly, and then I'll hand over to Catherine. We've also got colleagues in NHS who have looked at delayed discharges. The idea there being they've linked together data from various health records and social care data, looking at is there any way we can predict people who, when they go into hospital, end up staying for longer than they actually have to, purely because there isn't a care plan in place, and trying to build a predictive model of could we have identified them 6 months earlier, a year earlier, and actually put an appropriate care plan in place. So that's getting quite developed now. They've done a lot of the analysis, and they're actually at the point where they're going to start piloting that in a couple of areas of Scotland. So that's getting quite far along now. And one other one is I've got colleagues in Justice Analytical Services who are looking at reoffenders, so linking together data from the police, from social work, from prisons, and trying to find out who are the people most likely to reoffend, with the idea of offering them more intensive support when they come out of prison or after a conviction. So I'll hand over to Catherine just now.
Hi there. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what the Single Health and Work Gateway is and how it came about before I pass back over to Stephen. So Stephen's described what the project is looking at. So it's really about supporting people with a health condition or a disability to stay in work or get back to work. There's already much support in terms of early intervention support within Scotland, but it's quite difficult to navigate. It's quite a complex landscape with different eligibility criteria, and as a service user, it's a bit muddled. So the aim here really is to provide a more streamlined route into services that are going to support people and through that support. The core components of the project are bringing together and integrating and aligning these core services. We're also going to do some improvement work, which is a bit that I will be leading, and use improvement methodology, the small test of change approach, to really think about and learn, well, how can we get more referrals into the gateway and raise awareness of the service. We're carrying out a formal evaluation. Learning is obviously going to be key to this pilot, and Stephen is going to talk a little bit more about the predictive analytics tool, which is another component. So in terms of what the project is, it's a 2-year pilot, and it's a single point of contact for health and work support. So people will be able to call in or self-refer using the website. It launches end of June this year, so we're very busy just now, and it's going to be in Fife and Dundee, so there'll be the two pilot areas. So supporting those at risk of falling out of employment, recently unemployed, but importantly employers as well. So there'll be a whole range of services and support that all these groups can access through the single gateway. So this is it on a page. Hopefully you can see the referral pathway for individuals and employers. They will be referred into our core services, which will come together as one, which is a change. And they'll either be supported through these core programmes and case managed, or they might be referred on to some affiliated services who will provide them with support. Importantly, for the person, for the user, it will just feel like they are calling a number and getting the support that they need. That's how it should feel for them. And then finally, before I hand back over to Stephen, these are the key aims and outcomes around what we're trying to do. So building something that's easy to access, quick access, and also, of course, thinking about, well, how can we most effectively support people to move and remain in sustainable employment? So that sustainability piece is going to be key. The final aim at the bottom there of the slide is, of course, thinking about how we can reduce health-related absenteeism and really think about supporting people to retain their jobs as well. The final thing I should say actually around the Single Health and Work Gateway project is we just yesterday had our ministerial approval of the name for the service. So if you are looking us up online, we will actually be called Health and Work Support. That's the name of the service. So it only kind of happened yesterday, so we're just getting our slides and all our resources and stuff up to date. But if you're looking for further information, that's what it will be down under. I'll pass that over to you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so because the main focus with the single gateway is early intervention and prevention, and as Catherine said, we're really hoping to push people towards referring themselves into the service at the earliest opportunity, before there's obvious long-term poor employment outcomes. It becomes far more important that we're able to then triage people well and to understand risk when people actually present. With sometimes quite early nebulous problems, it can be at work, but just some slight problems in their duties at work or with attendance. So what we're hoping to do is, alongside the single gateway, to trial a predictive analytics tool that will help practitioners, call handlers to triage people when they phone up and to understand the risks involved. And this is going to involve some data linkage. So I'll go through some of the. It's all going to come up here. So generally, at the moment, we've got very good data on health, so we can understand when people are diagnosed with a condition. We understand quite a lot of their interactions through GPs, through referrals, secondary care, prescriptions, all these kind of things. And we understand we've got quite good longitudinal data on whether conditions get worse or whether they improve. We know a reasonable amount about employment, to understand, from administrative data, whether people drop out of employment, whether they stop paying income tax, whether they move on to certain relevant benefits, and then whether they go back into paying income tax, etc. We've also good survey data on these things as well. But it's very, very difficult to understand the risk factors of those two things combined. And there aren't a lot of data sources available that allow us to really investigate that. So what we're hoping to do is link together data. So there's a variety of data that we're looking to be using. So on the health side, there's very rich data sets held by NHS Information Services. We've got a lot of information on prescribing and appointments. GP data is coming online in Scotland, so that'll be really useful. And there's also survey data and data from the support services themselves and from the third sector. And we're hoping to link that with data from DWP particularly. But again, there's also some large-scale surveys in Scotland that deal with employment as well. The idea being, what we're looking to do is build predictive models that will allow a simple tool to be developed for practitioners who, starting in the right actually, so who actually should get priority? If we get a lot of people getting referred to the services, who's actually should we be focusing on to have the best outcomes? Also, because the risk factors perhaps might not be as obvious at that point. Are we referring the right people? Are we getting the right people into the service? Should we be doing different marketing? Should we be going to different people to get referrals, changing eligibility criteria, all these kind of things? And then as we develop through the pilot, we're also hoping that we'll start to be able to feedback data from the services themselves into what works for people, and then to do some predictive analytics on, are we actually doing the right things? Are the people getting referred to the right support services, or would they be, are they bouncing about 3 different places before they get to the right place? So these are the main things that we're trying to cover in that. And so I think that's my last slide, but I'm happy to answer any questions at a time, or please grab a hold of me at lunchtime, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let's give a round of applause. Thank you very much. Do you want to come down just there? So sadly, we're out of time for questions just now, but can I suggest we will very shortly be moving on to have a 20-minute break outside, refill with coffee. Perhaps if I could ask our colleagues from Scotland to join table 1. So on tables, you should see a sign with these discussion topics. If you wouldn't mind going to the one on your data initiatives, if you'd like to find out more about this predictive analytics work in Scotland, please do go and have a chat, ask your questions. But it sounds like a great initiative, really important policy area as well, and so we are keen to hear more. Thank you. I've been asked to mention Nesta's biggest flagship event of the year. FutureFest is coming up in July. There's a 10% discount code you can see on this slide. We'll bring it up again later in the day. But if you are interested in the trends we see today and how they manifest themselves in the future, do a bit of horizon scanning with us on some really cool topics with some excellent and high-profile speakers, please do join us at the Tobacco Docks on 6th and or 7th of July. As I said, I'll bring these details up once more later in the day. Finally, as you walk out to get recaffeinated, on Slido there should be a new poll question asking you about the biggest challenges you face in your organisation for making smarter use of data. Please take a quick moment to have a look at that during the break, and if I can invite you to be promptly back in here for 11:50, we'll then be hearing from the LGA. Thank you very much. A while ago, Nesta wrote a report particularly focusing on local government use of data called Wise Council, where we looked at this question which came up in our earlier conversation around the varying degrees of data maturity, specifically in local authorities, but true, of course, right across the public sector. And the question is, well, kind of what are the different questions you might ask to determine your strengths and weaknesses in that area? And it's been our great pleasure over the last few months to be working with the LGA on an online version of that sort of self-assessment tool to assess data maturity. And to talk about it today, we'll invite to the stage Tim Adams, Programme Manager for Data and Transparency at the LGA. Please put your hands together for Tim.
Hello everyone, my name's Tim Adams, as Eddie said, and I've been working in this space within local government since about 2001, and we spent much of our time over the last decade or more working on the technologies and the standards and the processes to follow and the transparency code and publishing data that can link to other data and so on and so forth. But it's only in the last 18 to 24 months that I've detected that we and people in our organisations have realised that data has value and it can be used and reused and reapplied, and it can certainly be the main fuel to making decisions. Evidence-based decision-making is the thing now. So there's been a real impetus to move in that way. The problem, and I don't want to start on a negative front, but the issue really is that we've had austerity in the sector, and you're all aware of this, and we've been doing it to death, but there's been substantial effects on our organisations. They've lost key staff. Many district councils now have no data analysts or business analysts at all. And as a consequence, one of the first things to go seems to be the data side of the organisations and the research teams and so on and so forth. And the heads of service are left to sort of apply what they can do with the knowledge they have. So we've been putting a lot of effort in the last few months, certainly, and years, into redefining the sort of things we do at the centre to try and help our sector. And I'm not going to go through each of those in turn, but you can see this year we had to put proposals to our boards and so on, and we were approved to go ahead with those sort of things. And there's a real emphasis this year not on the technology and the standards and the publishing, but on the training and the bringing the elected members and the councillors up to date, as we were discussing earlier, to see the roles and benefits, and connecting the academic organisations with students that want projects and so on, with councils that want data services being done, and finding clever ways of doing that. But the one I want to talk about particularly today is the bottom one, which is that data maturity model, and trying to help councils assess themselves to see where they are in the improvement journey, and then to be able to move along that journey and improve. And as Eddie said, Nesta have had this vision for quite some time of breaking down managing and handling data into the sort of key characteristics of what it takes to be able to govern and store and use and apply and analyse data, and to have a vision of maybe starting from a nascent sort of view of life and how you do things through to different levels of maturity till you become a real expert as an organisation. And they've defined what those things mean, and it was produced in work we did with them in 2016. Eddie mentioned, so I won't labour this now, but we had the local Datavores project, and we talked about this in our last conference in this room about a year or so ago, where they were looking at case studies in local government and finding real ways of where data was being used innovatively and novelly, and great things being done with them. And there's a very good report there. There's a link there you can find later. 20 or 30 or 40 case studies, some very detailed, some very sort of overviews and so on. But one key part of that work was this data maturity model. In one of the appendices at the back of that report is a model that looks like this. It's in an analog form, and for each of these different various stages of maturity, they've gone through each of the different aspects of that characteristic of managing data, and they've said what you would be doing to be able to manage and to assess yourself as being an advanced user, a basic user, and so on. And I'm not expecting you to see this and read it at the back, but it's to show the principle, because there's pages upon pages looking at different ways of how the data is to be applied and how you can assess yourself as you move along the journey. Now, what we decided to do last year was to try and open this up. So rather than someone analogy going through the table and saying, I'm probably about here for that and there for this, we said, can we put together some sort of online self-assessment tool that's free and certainly open to local government, but we're seeing it applies to many organisations, so you're very welcome to have a look when I sort of show you the details later. But what we did starting just after Christmas was to put together focus groups and workshops with Tom Simons and the team here at Nesta, and we consulted in Sheffield and in London. 30 or so local authorities took part, and we asked questions and we sought what their view was on doing something in this way. And the sort of things that we considered in those workshops was, are we doing a tool to assess the organisation, or is it something you apply just for a particular project and see if we're ready for that? They wanted it to be simple and easy to use. They wanted it not to be particularly just for data experts or IT experts. We wanted to see from a cultural point of view what people in the whole organisation thought about their use of data. But there are problems. How do we assess the organisational wide position of maturity when people have got so many wide-ranging experiences and views, but we hope that it would change culture, certainly encourage conversations and allow people to see where they are as an organisation and move forward. And what we decided in the end, in the result of the focus groups and the workshops, was we'd go for the organisational assessment. We'd put to one side the project readiness. We can come back to that later, though what we've done can be reapplied quite easily with just a little bit more work. But what we're really looking at doing is looking at a series of questions that people can answer, a bit like psychometric testing, and they can then go through and assess themselves, and we can compare the results. So we're looking at the questions, we're looking at the multiple assessors, different people feeding to the same questions and combining those scores to produce visual reports and text examples of where they are and ideas of next steps of where they can go along the journey. The advantages of that is you can encourage organisational-wide discussion, but the disadvantage is that it's going to be difficult to know if you've got the right people completing those assessment questions. Are they being typical of the organisation? Are they talking on behalf of the organisation or just a project they've run, and so on and so forth? But we'll see how it goes. Now, the LGA has a series of online tools that it uses widely to help local government manage and govern the data it uses, and we're going to put this tool there under the data section. There's a link at the bottom for you to find. And if you click that link and come to the data maturity model, and these are now just screen dumps to simulate using the system. You land on a landing page that tells you a bit about the tool, and also you're encouraged to sign in and register so we can record your results and you can see how things are going. And if you go through each of the different sections, let's start with click the user area of the model, you can see it looks like this. There are 5 questions in the use case, and there's a particular question that you can click when you click the start of the section, and it looks like this. You've got the question itself, and that one is looking at what the timely use of data is and so on, and there's a Likert report which lets you set where you are in terms of agreeing or disagreeing with the results. And you go through each of these and fill them in. And we do allow don't knows and don't understand, but we can't have too many of those to get a sensible score. And we go to the next set of questions, and I won't go through in detail, but there's 5 questions to go through on the data use. And if you go to the next section, you see we've gone on to the cultural area, and there are 7 questions. And I won't go through them all in detail, but you go through and fill these psychometric questions in, and then you can start to look at the results, and you can look at your own results compared with your organisation. And longer term, as we build up data, you can start to compare yourself with the sector. And the first sort of thing the report does is show how you've positioned your organisation in terms of your score, and you can compare it with what the councillors who've completed the assessment say, and others in your department, or the whole of the organisation that you're working for, and you can see the difference. And for each of those, we've defined, as in this particular case, I've said I've assessed myself as being an advanced organisation. I can see what the typical characteristics of that are, and for each of the lines of questioning, the report shows me what my different peers are saying. And then for each of the individual sections of the model, we can go through the same details in data use. You can see I think I'm an expert. The elected members think I'm only intermediate, so there's a conversation to be had there. And again, before, it tells you what a typical expert will look like to see if you're right. It gives case studies of where other organisations which we think are typical for you are doing similar things, and there's also best practice ideas, and there's links to other resources to learn and improve even further. So that's looking at your organisation. Then if we look at the position as a whole, we go, because of the structure of the questioning, I've talked about overall assessment and data use, we look at the awareness and culture, we look at the management, we look at the skills and capability section, and we look at the data governance. And for each of those, now looking at I pretended to be Essex Council when I was doing this, that's where Essex positions itself compared with other English authorities, compared with all county councils, because Essex is a county council, and compared with all other organisations within the east of England, because Essex is in the eastern region. And you can start to look at the differences there. And also, the same as before, you can look in more detail across the different Likert scores for each of the sections. So that's really it. Early days, it's only really opened up today, so we've not got a lot of data in there, but we'll see how things go. There's been lots of interest to start with. We're aware that there's rigour and consistency in collecting information, and we're looking at the easy use of it to try and collect opinion. We're not really sure yet whether it will give us the sort of results we're expecting, but we certainly think it will encourage conversations and give next steps on the improvement journey. The worries we have is we've no control over the respondents, so there could be all manner of different people feeding in, and it could be giving rogue results. We're still not sure yet whether people will actually assess their organisation. There may be not many people in the organisation know the effect of their organisation, and so they'll start to drop into things they do know, like their department or their projects and so on. But nonetheless, we're going to look at what trends appear, and then we'll work with Nesta over the course of the year when we build up our database to see what lessons are being learned and try and open up even more widely the results and put people in touch with each other to learn different aspects of the model. So it's there, it's free, it's early days, we're still learning, but please have a look at that and try, and we're hoping to open up the work Nesta has been doing over the last 24 months in a more ready-made online interactive tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Tim. And as I said, we really do want that feedback, want to find out what's useful, not just to improve the tool itself, but to see where there are key areas of that data maturity question, where further work, further resources are needed, which Nesta and other organisations like the LGA and many of you in this room, in fact, could be providing to support each other. Now, though, Paul mentioned right in his earliest comments around, this need to fix the plumbing, and so we thought that was a topic worth following up on. So our next session we'll be discussing: do we embrace the new or fix the plumbing? Is that a false choice, or is there a tension between trying to get the balance right between those two? We always find that in discussions around government and public sector use of technology, a lot of the articles, a lot of the conferences, a lot of the discussion focuses on the new and the shiny thing, the Internet of Things enabled widget or smart city infrastructure, blockchain for this and that, artificial intelligence. Will be coming to those this afternoon. But for now, let's just find out if our thoughts are merely fanciful and we should just be getting down to the hard grunt work behind the scenes. To help me debate that theme, I'm delighted to be able to invite now to the stage Cathy Settle from the Cabinet Office and Hilary Simpson, founder of Sleuth, the consultancy cooperative. Please give them a big round of applause. Now, before I invite them just to make some opening remarks, just by way of context, we found it enlightening last week when we tried to have a conference call just to
I was going to put this in my speech. You're going to ruin it.
In that case, wait for Cathy's excellent anecdote about our conference call. In which case, straight over to you. What are your thoughts on this theme? Embrace the new or fix the plumbing?
Thank you. So I should just say, by way of background, I spent 4 years in the Government Digital Service when we first set it up, hence in the Cabinet Office. But I have just spent 3 years on secondment to Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, particularly looking at reinvigorating public libraries, of which a strand of which, including working with Tim, actually was about data and what did we do there. So I suppose I'm bringing all that knowledge to the table. I suppose that, the question, embrace the new or fix the old, I suppose, would be the question. Clearly it can't be either or, and I think that's come out in this morning. I think, we have to actually do both. The opportunities that arise from new technology, whatever it be, blockchain, AI, and so on, we'd be foolish to ignore them. They provide opportunities both to improve service quality, to free up staff time from the sort of mundane routine tasks and enable them to focus on those value-added activities. And also, of course, and importantly, as Tim said, in the times of austerity, also to make efficiencies. But I think, based on my experience, I think, users will never forgive us, though, if we focus all our efforts on that at the expense of actually delivering the really quality basic services that they rely on and use every day. I think Paul spoke this morning very well about, some of the work that's gone on improving services like, paying for your council tax or getting your parking permit. And, we have made great strides in those, but clearly there's a way to go. But the example that Eddie just alluded to, I would highlight as sort of fixing some of the basics as well in the infrastructure. So, reliable broadband access and mobile phone coverage, actually is really what makes a difference to people when they try to do stuff. So, yes, in the run-up to this event, Eddie said, let's have a quick conference call with the panel and let's sort of, share our thoughts, just do, what we might cover. So I sat in that height of deprivation in London, Wimbledon Village, which anybody who knows, is hardly like the back of beyond, and tried to dial into this conference call on my mobile phone. Let's just say if you have EE, Wimbledon Village isn't great. Vodafone did better, and I finally did get into the conference call. But, if I was, a business person, or I'm working in the public sector, just trying to make life work, if we can't even make phone calls, if we can't use the internet and broadband and Wi-Fi, God help us. And just a plug for libraries, 99.4% of libraries now have free Wi-Fi access. So if you are ever anywhere and you can't get onto Wi-Fi, go to your public library. There's 3,000 of them across England. There's one on every corner. My plug for libraries. I think the other thing I would say is also in light of sort of recent controversies on the use of data, actually, again, the public is unlikely to trust us to go into the, exciting things like blockchain and AI, again, if they don't think that we can actually just collect and hold their data safely and responsibly and use it in ways that we are allowed to and we said we would, and we don't share it widely with people who shouldn't have access to it. So I think, that, again, is really important. Probably one of the things I would particularly agree with, I think Vicky made the point earlier, is about when we're looking at existing data, about at that sort of thing about actionable data. So how are we sure we know what the questions are that it would be helpful to actually answer, and how do we as data people help decision makers actually articulate their data needs? How do we help them ask the questions that we can then help them find the answers to? And as part of that, I think then it's how we use that existing data that we already hold. Certainly I've found, working with the library sector, that the capacity and capability of the sector to have the time to actually analyse all the actually myriad of existing data that they hold and to come up with some useful insights was woefully limited. People didn't have the time, they hadn't got the skills, and again, as a profession, I think we need to help people build that time and skills and enable them to do stuff. The other point I would totally agree with, came out from the last section, was about the culture shift in organisations, how we encourage people to share data, to be more transparent about what they do. Certainly, again, back in the libraries data field, we wanted to produce what Paul would probably call a register of libraries and data about libraries. There was a lot of resistance about sharing that data for a whole range of reasons. But actually what we found when we managed to finally get it out there is actually, that sort of crowdsourcing and assessing and visibility of that data meant that so many people came back to us and highlighted to us where there were errors and mistakes. So actually transparency of data can really improve the quality if you do it well. Final point I think probably would just be about the new technology. As I said, I think we do have to embrace it. I think that old adage of start small and fail fast is really critical. Let's not go the whole hog, let's take it in little steps, let's prototype some stuff, let's build confidence, let's build trust, let's show what's possible. I think the proposal about this sort of data intervention library, I think, is a really good way of showcasing some of that really good stuff that's already going on. And I think then we have to be mature enough in our organisations then to learn from others, to adapt and to reuse and not do the it wasn't invented here syndrome, which unfortunately we do see every so often. So I think there is a lot of good practice out there and we should definitely be building on it.
Thank you very much. Lots of important points there. And we've been fixing the old with our bits of paper. Hilary is looking with a very impressive tablet device for her notes. But Hilary, what are your thoughts on this theme?
So my thoughts are, obviously I agree with Cathy to a large extent around the issue of it's not either or. It is a question of blending. So my background is I've spent 20 years working in local government in technology services, keeping the lights on, doing the plumbing and the grunt work and making sure that child protection, social care systems are on 24/7 and social workers are supported in making life and death decisions at the front line. So I'm fully aware that that is number one priority. Keep calm and carry on. But what I'm interested in really is in making it as easy as possible for those people who are in my position, or who are now still in my position, and I've moved on now to, I'm very lucky that I'm now working in a more sort of innovative area and talking to a lot of SMEs and small organisations who've got amazing, exciting products that are an order of 10 in terms of magnitude, in terms of speed of delivery and cost. Almost unbelievable levels of innovation that are up and running in 1 or 2 councils, but that other councils don't know about. So what I want to do is make it, massively easier, really, for people who are in my position to know what innovation there is out there. And actually, the area that I think is really interesting is not necessarily the startups, which are, can be the bleeding edge, but that's, away from centre stage. There are some SMEs who are quite well established and who have 2 or 3 local government clients already who are just trying to get their voices heard. So I'm interested in I'm curious about all innovation, to be honest with you. I'm interested in tools that, something like machine learning, I think, even 2 years ago was barely mentioned. And at the time when we put in the master data management solution in Camden, which is a probabilistic matching technology, which actually solves the problem of those myriad of Scottish names. It solves that problem. It does as good a job as a person can do in assessing whether those 2 strings of characters mean the same thing. I don't think we even used the term machine learning. I think we used the term probabilistic matching, but machine learning wasn't a term. So, only 2 years ago, that wasn't something that was anyone in local government would have been talking about. But now, the idea of probabilistic rather than deterministic binary decision making by tools that are used every day now in the public sector, and actually, obviously even more ubiquitously. One of the things I think is really interesting is the idea of just moving ubiquitous technologies from other sectors into the public sector. So I don't think we're really making enough use of those technologies. For example, anti-money laundering in banks. It's absolutely ubiquitous that they do use probabilistic matching for identity. And you find that if a CIO from a bank or somebody who's previously worked in a bank IT team moves into local government, it's very interesting that they are shocked that we're not making more use of these tools. They immediately can't understand why there's so little evidence of those kind of technologies being used. So I suppose, I'm afraid we're running out of time a little bit, I feel, in local government in terms of trying to find every possible way of saving money and saving lives and protecting vulnerable people. And in some councils, Northamptonshire and I think Worcester are also in quite a bad situation financially now. We're running out of time, and we've got to look everywhere for innovation, bluntly, I'm afraid. But I think it's definitely the case that, if we're not looking at data, it doesn't matter what technology you layer on top of it, it's not going to mean anything. Blockchain will mean nothing if the data, if the distributed databases have got information in them that is incorrect and doesn't reflect reality. It won't, it'll be another data source that the public have less and less trust in. And as public servants, working in the public sector, for me, that is why this whole data this whole data agenda is so critical, because if we're not holding information that reflects reality one way or another, or if we don't listen and we don't believe it and we don't interpret it and we don't understand it, that is where we start to lose the trust of citizens. And I think a couple of weeks ago I was at the Soccer Team President's Conference in Glasgow. Representatives from Sweden there, the level of trust amongst Swedish citizens of their government is much higher than it is here, and they recognise that their government is keeping up to speed with technological advances and is also managing their identity in a very slick, easy-to-use way that doesn't exclude proportions of the population who are not necessarily easily or readily engaged in technology. They make every effort to make sure that And just finally, I mean, I think someone like Aylesbury Vale is a beautiful example of using old and new technology combined with people and staff in an end-to-end process where they they use Alexa for voice recognition so that digitally excluded people can interact directly with the council website. They use chatbots, and finally then that flows into agents on the ground. And that's designed, I think is quite interesting, by an ergonomist who's got a slightly different mindset about what this is about, because it is about, you know, just making things work in a slick way for all of us. And for me, information technology should be the same as all technology. You know, I don't go around riding a rusty bike. You know, my bike is properly oiled and it's slick and it works, and it's old actually, but it's got new tyres. It doesn't matter, so long as it works. That's what the public want to know, in my view.
Very good. Thank you so much. So many themes that we'll come back and return to. Briefly, just to mention, Hilary was a co-author of our data practice guide. So if you're interested in diving into the difference between deterministic and probabilistic matching, there is a section on that for anyone who's not familiar with those terms. To just frame our discussion, could you perhaps both just comment on, at either end of this spectrum, if we are to fix the basics, is there one set of basics that are the most urgent in your mind to fix? And on the emerging technologies, or the ones that have now reached an exciting state of maturity, are there any in particular that you think have got real potential or game-changing potential for the public sector? Kathy, what would you look at either end?
It's a hard one. I think probably, actually, some of the basics actually are about information as much as anything. So it's just helping signpost people through the different stages. Let's give you an example. I was helping someone the other day set up a business. And I thought, okay, we'll start with Company's House. She did the Company's House service, which I have to say was very good. So they've done a really, really great job. And then sort of got pointed towards tax and HMRC, at which point I have to say, sorry if anybody from HMRC in the room, it sort of fell apart a bit. You know, the language was, you know, not very easy to work through. It was very hard to know what to do. You know, so even just some of those basics about simple signposting through people through steps on a journey, that whole end-to-end service design thing, I think is something we can work on. I think once you actually then get into the services, you know, again, I think Paul highlighted earlier, there's some fabulous examples out there, and Company's House ones I think were really great. And at each stage in the process, they told you where they were up to. They sent you a message saying this is what's going to happen next, this is what's going on. You know, you felt involved and you felt you knew what was happening. I contrast that with the HMRC one, where the messages you got back, it was completely impenetrable about what on earth was going on and where you were and what you had to do. So I think just some of those basics, I think I would flag.
And at the shiny end?
So I guess some of the stuff that maybe you see with some of the banks, I would agree. I think would be really good examples. So I'm struggling to think of a good example off the top of my head. Go on. Yeah.
Let's go to Hilary. What about the emerging technologies? Which ones do you actually think, oh, that really could make a difference?
Well, there are two things really. I mean, one of the things I think is really, really critical is the issue about lack of skills. So few people coming through into digital and data. We haven't got enough people. And I wonder whether we've actually deployed enough technology and enough innovation within our own workforce. So I think two areas that are very interesting is code generation. So rather than using Ruby and Python in local government, for example, in London we can't afford to pay for the rates going and hand program lots of systems. But we do need much more responsive ways of having a component approach to technology with legacy. So we do need skills around people who can, can blend and match different types of technology from legacy to cutting edge. So the first thing I would say is some of the tools around that I've seen from SMEs recently are code generation tools, which could readily be picked up by, people who are good at SQL but are not necessarily cutting-edge programmers within local government that can be handed on, you know, and the lovely thing about SMEs is quite often they haven't got the capacity to want to keep engaged all the time in something. They want to hand on the skills. So that, you know, the code generation, so that you could, instead of having programmers in-house, you can have some simple code generation tools. But the other thing is around machine learning, because, you know, when we're talking about data analysts, far too many of them are spending all the time matching and cleaning data, when actually there are tools to do this now, and the banks know that. So, I mean, that's not massively cutting edge, but it's a huge productivity gain. Yeah. I mean, you cannot match the volumes of council data, you know, in real time, so that frontline staff can use that information to make case decisions manually, and still too many councils are pretty much doing it manually. With, you know, so that's very important to me. In terms of sorry, we would just, I mean, the other areas I think that are very interesting are, I mean, the main thing I think is critical is, you know, from a service perspective, is that we need to move on from just place data and geocoding UPRNs and matching data sets and breaking down place data silos to moving on to breaking down the people data silos, because that's more than 50% of spend in councils now. And, you know, it's the people, it's the difficult stuff, the personal data matching, just, you know, proportionate, ethical, limited silo busting across services, across the whole of the public sector, like they're doing in Worcestershire, for example, which is a brilliant example, is what is now needed, I think, in local government in a very pressing way. But it's the same technologies. It's the same, you know, linking and matching technologies. It used to be really expensive. They used to be, you know, multinational size systems that, you know, cost a fortune. Now there are SMEs that do exactly the same stuff for a tenth of the cost.
So let's pick up on this point, because it sounds like there is now more innovative range of options for fixing the basics. It doesn't have to be so dull and unglamorous. There's some really cool tools that enable us to do that bit. There's also SMEs, no doubt, who are offering, you know, the blockchain version solution, the IoT solution, the AI solution. This general theme of how does the public sector work effectively with the best innovation from the private sector or the third sector is a really tough one. We know part of the central government digital narrative was sort of just being fed up with big suppliers, a big shift to doing more coding in-house, but then some feeling then we're now missing out on, you know, what about all the SMEs who are offering great tools? How do we, on this question, get the best from the tech sector? Because they've got the solutions, but we've got to try and figure out where they plug in, where it's helpful, and there's often a communication gap, at least is my impression.
No, there is, yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, giving a library's example, one of the things that they do obviously is manage loads of data about, you know, whether it's their stock or their users or whatever, and usually through a thing called a library management system, not very inventively named. And what was really clear from looking at those systems is, you know, the staff in the library were going, oh, this is so clunky, it's, you know, it's really awful, users didn't like it. But actually, when you looked into it, what the library service had got was exactly what they had asked for. So the way they had procured, you know, had gone down to the great nth of detail of, you know, we want blue polka dots and we want, you know, this button here and that button there, and it says everything. And literally, they had got what they had paid for. And I think one of the things that the conversations we were having them with is, you know, let's change that round. Let's start talking about the actual outcomes you want to achieve. You know, what's the big picture thing you're trying to get to? And then let's free up the market to come forward with innovative solutions, often that they've deployed elsewhere in other sectors. And let's bring that innovation to the market. And we've, you know, that's starting to come through now in some of the newer procurements. But actually, it is quite a, that's our culture change. It's quite a mind shift for the staff to think in that way. And quite often, even when the library service people were, oh, yeah, I get it, you know, I could see how that would work, they would go to their sort of legal procurement, whatever people who all went, yeah, that's nice, but can we just go back to these blue polka dots, you know? So I think it's a whole organisation needs to shift its way of thinking about how it procures and enable that you know, the innovation from the SMEs to come in and to help them with those questions.
I think that problem-based procurement, challenge-based procurement, really important one. And so organisations like City Mart, I know, are trying to offer this around different parts of the public sector. And I think from conversations with them, often found by the time you get to thinking you need to procure something, your thinking is already, it's too late. It's so much earlier in that thought process that you need to think of those alternatives. But no, really important point. Hilary, what about you?
Well,
and you held an entire event on this last week, I believe.
I did actually. That's
okay,
right.
So
yeah.
what was the summary of?
So the summary
findings?
of that is actually I did a Medium blog on this yesterday. If people want to read it, it's on LinkedIn.
That's the long version. Okay.
That's the long version. The short version, sorry, is the short version is that I put a post onto LinkedIn about legacy system suppliers and got 15,000 people coming back, and it was the dullest post you can imagine. So I thought there must be something in this.
People like the basics.
Yeah, they're worried about the plumbing. Yeah. There's no question about that. So in the end, we ran an unconference, and it was mainly SMEs that attended. We had a sort of majority SMEs, some local government people, some procurement people. But it was very interesting because it got to this very point about their level of frustration about engaging with local government and actually the difficulty of local government knowing what's out there and finding it hard to believe how good some of these things are because they're an order of magnitude better. So, I mean, the sorts of things that are going really well, I think, Hackney are doing some of this. ADAS, the Association of Adult Social Care Leaders, is doing some of this, is the sort of the events where the main thing that was quite interesting was actually around the fact that the client, the procurer, is the person who is changing, is the change agent for the service. It's not necessarily IT anymore. So that's the person you need to get to, plain English, not tech speak. Don't describe it as a technology product, but describe it as a benefit, a solution, and that's very important that came out. There were very little talk actually about procurement frameworks. People weren't that worried about that. They were more worried about the idea of getting in there and getting people to see what they're doing. And what we're actually going to do on the back of this is we're thinking, and during the event, we videoed several SMEs, just 5-minute slots explaining what their technology was. So this is the equivalent of a stand at a conference, but it's going to be virtual. We're going to set up a resource space. Hopefully it can be queryable by local government association service list, because of course there's 800 services in a council, so any technology will be applicable somewhere in a council, that's guaranteed. There's so many different services. So I think what we're going to do on the back of that is find a way of showcasing a virtual way that if I were redesigning adult social care personalisation services, I could log on to a resource, find some videos, run through 35-minute video clips in a day, and suddenly my idea of what could be done in personalisation has expanded from this, which was the legacy system and what that did and my specification, to this, which is everything that's available from SMEs in an up-to-date way. So
seeing that art of the possible.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
Really
I mean,
important.
and it's tenfold. It's it's massively wider than people think.
Okay.
And I think what you do find as well, I mean, a lot of us we know are hampered by legacy, and that can be quite hard to see through. But I think when you look at some of the way that some of the technology is being used in some of the emerging markets overseas, particularly where they haven't got that, or we all love Estonia, again starting with a blank sheet of paper, and clearly there are advantages with doing that. But actually, yes, they really do showcase what's feasible, and okay, maybe you have to adapt them and deploy them in different ways here, and do it in smaller chunks and things. But I still think a lot of that is very feasible to do here. So.
Thank you. I'll just check if my colleagues can get some mics ready, because I think we should do the low-tech version and ask a question. But whilst they're getting those out and about, I think we've probably covered Sarah's one around connecting SMEs with local government. But how about this one? We've got 2 questions around how on earth is the public sector meant to retain the appropriate tech talent, even if they're not coding it themselves, but to be the intelligent, smart, demanding customers. When salaries in London, you've got the investment banks, we've got Google, we've got Apple, every major city's got those other big corporate recruiters. How do we keep them?
I mean, this is something we battled with in Government Digital Service, and certainly central government, and I was still battling with. I think one of the big things we found, actually, and we underestimate this in the public sector, is actually that sort of that drive to contribute to society and the public good, if you like. So a lot of people came to us because of the mission of what we were trying to do, and because actually they could see how they could make the world better for people, and that is a really strong driver. I think also, yes, a lot of them could have worked in SMEs and got way more money, but actually some of the products that they'd have worked, some of the
maybe.
Yeah, bigger companies, but a lot of those things that they would have worked on might have been seen by a sort of a handful of people. Yeah. They came to work to GDS, they worked on GovUK, that product's seen by billions of people every week. So actually the showcase for their talents, I think, was really important. The other one I would say as well was it's also a lot about the people they are going to be able to work with. So, we started off with just a few people who were really sort of high profile in the tech field, in the digital and tech field. And then people wanted to come and work with them because they really wanted to learn from those people. And once you've got one or two of those people in, actually, they're all connected. So they all talk to their friends and their colleagues and, come in. And actually, once you've got that, they automatically sort of connect and showcase. So a lot of the people we brought in were friends of friends and people who'd worked together before.
So, I mean, my angle on this is also around diversity, because I think there's a large part of the workforce is almost missing, really, and we need to make it attractive to that section, a much wider range of people, because I actually believe that technology jobs are much wider than people think. They're not just about coding, they're about running events, for example, communicating, engaging. There's a much wider range of jobs in technology than people think, but
aside, you said the change management role is the first to recruit,
the change management role. But aside from that, I think, particularly in local government, then we have to grow our own, and that is a great thing because it brings loads of energy in, and it's something that we did in Camden when I was working there. In fact, Brendan is here today. One of 14 IT entrants that we brought in, fresh faces. People who hadn't worked in technology at all in the past, who were able to very quickly, through mentoring and coaching through experienced people, they were able to get up to speed and replace very expensive consultants that were working. That was the only way that we could plug the gaps, was through contractors at the time, and within 3 to 6 months they were doing really sophisticated jobs, including a young woman who was working in Santander on the front desk, who is now sort of second in command in information security in Camden. Brendan is now working in master data management. He hadn't had any track record previously in technology, and various people who dropped out of the technology workforce that we brought back in again. So an extraordinarily wide range of people who would not previously have been looked at, because we've got that sort of tick box approach and a great big long list of person specification details with loads of technical qualifications which are not required. We came down to five attributes, character attributes almost. And I think this actually feeds into some of the work that Nesta have done around skills for the information age, skills for the future. It is not all about can you code, it's about your personal attributes that you bring to a job. And we found that reaped huge rewards, and we had an injection of youth and vigour into the service that was really
brilliant
needed.
Example, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just conscious of time and keen just to get some voices from around the room. Could you just raise your hands if you wanted to ask a question? Raise it really high. So there's a gentleman back. Let's just take 3, and then if we do one after, I've got 2 so far. Let's ask those 2, present them back, and then you can wrap those up with any sort of final remarks you'd like to leave with the audience. Gentleman at the back first.
Apparently I need to stand up. Yeah, so you were talking about trust, and I think that's incredibly important, because part of the problem when using machine learning is that you can't negotiate with a computer. So computers, if I order something from Amazon and it doesn't arrive, and I go online and I use a bot or something like that, and I say, where's my package? I might not die as a result of the package being delivered. If I were to then have a machine making a decision about social care provision or benefit provision or some other sort of something like that, then not only is this something which affects your life massively, but you can't then recontextualize your situation to that computer. I had an experience recently when I was getting life insurance, and I had to phone up the underwriter, and I was saying to the underwriter, why have you made this decision about my insurance premium? And he said, because certain aspects of what data we've collected from your circumstances suggest to me that we can't give you this for less than this money, and that we can't insure you in this way, in the way that you wanted, we can only insure you in that way. I couldn't negotiate with him. I couldn't recontextualize the information that I had. Secondly, the decision maker, the human decision maker, was beholden to the computer itself. And secondly, the way that the computer was designed in order to take into account those circumstances, reinforced and kind of made completely intractable because a human couldn't make a decision, certain stigmas about certain illnesses that certain people have.
Okay, thank you for that. Quite a really important point. In fact, we'll be picking up on that similar theme in our session on the rights and wrongs of algorithmic decision-making later, but we'll put that to our two panellists. And just finally, with the gentleman at the front, brief question. We're almost out of time, but yes, do present your question.
Yeah, hello indeed. Najmal Hassan, University of Greenwich, data scientist and statistician. Well, the question is around innovation by digital analytics. And as we appreciate and we understand that there are a few examples where in the local government landscape, local authorities are using new data, the business of generating new data, and not to be locked into legacy systems and legacy-based data. And especially to answer questions and to seek answers that we don't have for questions that we need to address. Examples from private sector tell us that even companies in the retail sector, like M&S, failed to generate new data. So they couldn't see the need to close down 100 stores even a few months back. Yeah. So we have the tools.
So what's your question?
Yeah, so the question is, are there any examples of new data that are being generated in the local government landscape to answer questions that need to be answered and for which we don't have the data, but we need to generate data?
Very good points. Actually, briefly on our, when we've looked at some of our sort of Office of Data Analytics pilots that we've supported, sometimes the conclusion is the data isn't there to do this thing, but what a brilliant insight to figure out if we start collecting it, we can start resolving this a few years from now. So in your final remarks, perhaps just a minute each, if you want to comment on that point around trust and perhaps how do we engage and have a trust and meaningful experience when it's the algorithm or the computer trying to make a decision. And yeah, what about this question of new data? Where can we see it collected to solve some of our challenges? Why don't we do it reverse order? Hilary.
Okay, so I mean, my personal view about anything to do with algorithmic decision making is that there needs to always be an escape lane that involves a person. I think Derbyshire University, or one of the universities around Derbyshire, has done a lot of work on this with the police, which I think is a very useful framework. But I think Eddie's also doing some work on it, aren't you, around the ethics of AI. I mean, I don't think there should ever be a situation where the final word is computer says no. I mean, that is a very dangerous situation to be in. I think there always needs to be an escape route. And the second thing around new data, well, I think what's quite interesting is particularly something like in adult social care, the 3 conversations model, which is about it's really about writing biographies of older people, and from that looking at a strengths-based approach to looking at the strengths rather than the weaknesses, you know, not what their illness is, but what their interest is. Perhaps they used to be a bridge player and they'd like to get back into that, and if they do that, that'll help in other areas of their lives. And the idea of then using text analytics so that actually if you do more in the way of qualitative data collection, you're more likely not to miss these new areas of information that are coming up that are more relevant perhaps than a tick box that says someone needs Meals on Wheels. You know, I think if we think more about qualitative data, and I think that's the way we're going in a lot of people's services, is not check boxes where we put square pegs in round holes and give them standardised care plans, but they're much more personalised around their own story. And text analytics, I think, is particularly relevant to make sure we don't miss new data.
Thank you. Kathy, final word?
I mean, on the first question, I totally agree. The thing I'd written down was sort of multi-channel, because absolutely it cannot just be a computer response. The whole point of freeing up staff time from the mundane and the routine is so that they can do that value-added activity where actually they are empowered to make decisions based on a sort of more nuanced understanding of the information. The data, that was a really great example. I think the data that we found, certainly in the libraries field, was we were great at collecting numbers, how many people came through the door, how many books were loaned. We were really rubbish at working out what was the impact of someone having read a book, you know, so the fact that, you know, literacy levels in the area increased, or as a result of some of the information we were providing about health and well-being, that, you know, someone's health improved or whatever. So I think there's a whole area about not just the raw numbers of what we're doing, but what's the impact of the activities we're doing, which I think is a whole new data strand that we started touching on, but we had a long way to go. So.
Thank you both very much. I think we could be talking about this for many more hours. So many interesting themes there. Both our speakers are around at least for a while during our lunch break, which is in just a moment. But for now, please put your hands together in appreciation for Hilary Simpson and Cathy Settle. Thank you very much. And just as we go out to our lunch break, if we can just bring up our third poll question for whilst you are enjoying your lunch, please do take a moment to think about, as a private citizen, how concerned are you, if at all, about the privacy of your personal data on the internet? Couldn't be more topical than this week, but interested to hear the views of a very data-savvy audience. We'll be returning after an hour's lunch break for a packed afternoon, so please do come back promptly for that. During this lunchtime, again, we invite you to congregate based on themes that you might be interested in discussing further. Again, sharing your data initiatives, and you'll see these on posters around in the cafe area. If you want to talk about new technologies based on the conversation I've just had with Cathy and Hilary, there's a conversation for that. Working with the tech sector, actually maybe Hilary might want to stop by there to share some of her thoughts from last week's event. Tim, if he is still able to stay with us to talk about our data maturity interactive tool, and preempting our conversation for this afternoon, if you want to chat about using algorithms, there's a table there. For now though, thank you very much. Go and enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you back here in just under an hour.